In a world where loyalty is forged in blood and betrayal wears familiar faces, one man must walk the path he swore never to return to. When the most dangerous traitor in the realm is captured, an elite escort is assigned to deliver him to his execution. But what begins as a routine mission spirals into a deadly journey through ambush, deception, and forgotten sins. As shadows close in and the powerful shroud rises from the dark, a quiet escort reveals himself to be something far more terrifying than anyone imagined. The retired Blade Lord, a legend thought long dead. Bound by duty, hunted by the past, and betrayed by truth itself, he must face the very empire he helped build, and the master who once owned his soul, the fatal escort. The city of Veyralin slept under a brittle crescent moon, its towers casting long, trembling shadows over the cobblestone streets. Silence wrapped the capital like a fragile veil, but it was a false one. Beneath the calm, whispers of betrayal threaded through the alleys, and the faint scent of fear lingered in the air. Within the fortified walls of the Couriers Guild, the nation's most elite escort force assembled. These men and women were trained not just to fight, but to endure trials that would break ordinary souls. Tonight they prepared for a mission so perilous it had already been whispered about in trembling tones across every barracks in the kingdom, escorting the infamous traitor, Matthew Cole, to the capital for execution. Matthew's name alone carried weight, fear, and fascination. A man who had once commanded legions, whose cunning had toppled governments, and whose betrayal had led to countless deaths. He was as dangerous in chains as he had been at the height of his power. Yet here he was, shackled and seemingly defiant, sitting upon a wooden platform in the guild's courtyard. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the assembled couriers as though measuring their souls, predicting their failures. At the forefront stood Commander Elias Vard, a veteran whose face bore the scars of countless campaigns. His jaw was tight, his eyes sharp as flint, and his posture radiated authority. He knew this mission was more than just escorting a prisoner. It was a gamble against a shadow that moved unseen, a force that would strike without warning. "Tonight," he said, voice steady and commanding, "we walk a path lined with death. Cole is no ordinary prisoner, and his enemies are everywhere. The Shroud is not just a name whispered in fear, they are real, and they will stop at nothing to claim him. Our success depends on vigilance, discipline, and unity." A murmur of agreement rippled through the couriers. Among them was Nico, a quiet figure at the edge of the formation. He wore the standard uniform, gloves laced tightly, boots polished to a mirror sheen. He spoke little, smiled less, and carried himself with the unassuming poise of a man who belonged to no one's notice. Yet there was a weight in his gaze, a sense of something hidden beneath calm exteriors and disciplined gestures. As the couriers readied their horses and inspected their arms, Matthew Cole tilted his head, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "You think this is a task of strength," he said, voice like velvet over steel. "But strength alone will not see you through. You walk among wolves disguised as men. One misstep, and your heads will feed the Shroud." Elias's hand clenched instinctively, but he forced a calm. "We will succeed. You will not escape, not tonight, not ever." Cole's laugh was quiet, chilling, bravery, or perhaps arrogance. "We shall see." The escort set out under the cloak of night, the moon casting pale light on the road ahead. The first leg of the journey was treacherous, the winding forest path of Eldritch, a place where shadows clung like living things, and the wind whispered through the trees, as if carrying messages from unseen enemies. Nico rode near the rear, observing the group with the precision of a predator. His hands rested lightly on his blade, not in anticipation but in readiness. It had been years since he had drawn it in battle, but the instincts, the ones that had earned him the title of Blade Lord, remained sharp. and as the wind carried a faint rustling from the trees ahead, Nico's eyes narrowed. Something was coming. A flash of movement too quick for ordinary eyes revealed the first attack. Shrouded figures dropped from the treetops, striking with curved blades that gleamed in the moonlight. The couriers reacted instantly, forming defensive circles, horses rearing, swords drawn. Matthew Cole, still shackled, laughed softly as chaos erupted around him, as though the danger thrilled him. Nico moved with effortless precision, intercepting attackers, disarming them with fluid strikes that seemed almost too graceful, too fast to be human. A courier next to him glanced in astonishment. Who is he? Elias watched Nico's movements with a trained eye, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face, though he could not yet place it. Nico fought not with the brute force of a soldier, but with the elegance and deadly precision of a master. The forest echoed with the clash of steel, shouts, and the occasional growl of wounded men. Yet somehow the escort pressed forward, inch by perilous inch. By the time the attack subsided, the team had suffered only minor injuries, but the message was clear. The shroud was not idle, and they would not allow Matthew Cole to reach the capital unscathed. Nico sheathed his blade quietly, returning to his unassuming stance at the rear, letting the others believe they had simply been lucky. Elias's mind raced. Who was this quiet courier who moved like a shadow through chaos? He would have to watch him carefully. Whatever secrets Nico carried, they could tip the balance of this mission. As the first hints of dawn colored the horizon, the escort pressed on, aware that the true test was still ahead. The journey had only begun, and already peril stalked their every step. The road of Whispers morning came reluctantly, as though the sun itself feared what lay ahead. Pale light filtered through the towering trees of Eldrith Forest, revealing the aftermath of the night's ambush. Broken branches, darkened bloodstains, and the still forms of fallen attackers painted a grim picture. The couriers moved quietly, their earlier confidence replaced by wary alertness. No one spoke of the dead, but every eye drifted instinctively to the shadows between the trees. Matthew Cole walked in chains at the center of the formation, his posture relaxed, almost amused. Despite the iron restraints biting into his wrists, he looked less like a condemned traitor and more like a man observing a game already decided. "You should have killed them all," he said casually, glancing over his shoulder at the bodies being dragged aside. "Mercy has a way of circling back." Commander Elias ignored him. "You speak too freely for a man facing execution." Matthew chuckled. "Execution is a door, Commander, not always the end." Elias clenched his jaw and motioned for the column to move. They traveled through narrow trails where sunlight barely reached the forest floor. The trees here were ancient, thick, twisted trunks, scarred by time and war. Legends claimed this forest once drank blood so deeply that the roots still remembered it. Nico rode near the rear as usual, eyes scanning every angle. His calm masked a storm of memory. Each step forward dragged him closer to a past he had sworn never to touch again. He had been Blade Lord once, a title earned not by rank but by fear. Back then kings bowed and generals trembled. His sword had decided wars before they ever began. But power, he had learned, came with a cost too heavy to bear. When the final blade fell and the screams faded, he had vanished, choosing obscurity over glory, silence over slaughter. Yet now fate had dragged him back. A sudden whistle cut through the air. Down, arrows screamed from the trees. The formation shattered as couriers dove for cover. One man fell instantly, an arrow buried deep in his throat. Another screamed as steel pierced his thigh. "Shroud!" someone yelled. This ambush was different, cleaner, deadlier. The attackers didn't rush blindly. They coordinated. Nico moved before thought could catch him. He seized a fallen shield, deflecting 2 arrows mid-flight, then lunged forward, blade flashing. His movements were impossibly precise, no wasted motion, no hesitation. A masked assailant leapt from the branches above, but Nico pivoted and struck once, clean and final. The man fell without a sound. Elias noticed everything. "Form up," he shouted. "Protect the prisoner." Matthew watched with sharp interest as Nico carved a path through the chaos. Recognition flickered in his eyes, then amusement. "So," he murmured, "the ghost walks again." The fight was brutal but brief. The shroud attackers withdrew as suddenly as they had appeared, melting back into the forest as though swallowed by the trees themselves. Silence followed, heavy and unnatural. Bodies lay scattered, blood soaked into the earth. The escort had survived, but barely. Elias approached Nico slowly, studying him with narrowed eyes. "You fight like someone I once knew." Nico wiped his blade clean and slid it back into its sheath. "Many men fight well." "Not like that," Elias replied. "That style, that discipline. You trained under the high blades." Nico said nothing. Matthew laughed softly. "Oh, he trained more than that, Commander. You're standing beside a legend." Every eye turned toward Nico. The air tightened. Elias's hand dropped slowly to his sword. "Explain." Nico exhaled. For years he had buried this truth, but it clawed its way back now, demanding acknowledgement. "I was the Blade Lord," he said quietly. "Before the wars ended, before I walked away." Shock rippled through the group. "The Blade Lord is dead," someone whispered. "I was supposed to be," Nico replied. Silence fell like a blade. Elias stared at him, disbelief slowly hardening into awe and concern. "Then why hide?" "Because the blade never stops calling," Nico said. "And because men like him," he glanced at Matthew, "never stop using it." Matthew smiled, eyes gleaming. "I knew they'd send you eventually." Elias's voice was low. "You know each other." "Too well," Matthew replied. "He was the hand that almost ended me." Nico's jaw tightened. "And you were the reason thousands died." A distant horn echoed through the trees, long, low, wrong. Every courier stiffened. "That's not ours," someone whispered. The sound came again, closer this time. Elias turned sharply. "We move now." But before they could take a step, the forest itself seemed to shift. Figures emerged, not dozens, but hundreds, cloaked, armored, disciplined. At their center stood a tall figure cloaked in black and silver, face hidden behind an obsidian mask carved with ancient sigils. The Shroud's commander. Matthew laughed openly now. "Ah, you're late." The masked figure raised a hand, and the forest fell silent. "Hand over the prisoner," the voice echoed calm, cold, absolute. "And the Blade Lord may yet live." Nico stepped forward. "You'll have to earn him." Steel sang as blades were drawn, and the forest of Eldrith prepared to drink again, when steel remembers. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Leaves trembled without wind. Birds had long fled. Even the insects fell silent, as though instinct itself warned them to hide. The Shroud's commander stood unmoving, black cloak brushing the forest floor like a living shadow. Behind him, ranks of masked soldiers spread out with terrifying precision, encircling the escort. These were not bandits or mercenaries. They were professionals, trained killers bound by discipline and devotion. Commander Elias slowly raised his sword. "No one breaks formation," he ordered, "no matter what happens." Matthew Cole tilted his head, chains rattling softly. "You're outnumbered 3-1, Commander." "And surrounded." Again, Elias ignored him. Nico stepped forward, boots sinking slightly into the blood-soaked earth. The moment felt familiar, too familiar. The weight of impending slaughter pressed against his chest like an old wound reopened. The masked commander's gaze fixed on Nico. "So the Blade Lord breathes after all," the voice said. "We thought you broken." "I was," Nico replied, "until you forced me to remember." Steel slid from its sheath. The sound alone sent a ripple through the shroud's ranks. "Last chance," the commander said. "Step aside. The traitor belongs to us." Nico's grip tightened. "Over my corpse." The commander lowered his hand. The forest exploded into violence. Arrows rained down. Steel clashed. Horses screamed and reared as chaos erupted in every direction. The shroud advanced like a tide, blades flashing in coordinated waves meant to overwhelm and divide. Nico moved, not as a courier, not as a subordinate, but as the Blade Lord reborn. He flowed through the battlefield with terrifying grace, each strike decisive, each movement lethal. Blades shattered under his precision, throats opened before screams could form. He did not rage, he calculated. This was not fury, this was mastery. Couriers stared in disbelief as Nico cut through the shroud's elite like a storm given human shape. Elias fought nearby, seasoned and skilled, but even he struggled to keep pace with what he witnessed. "By the gods," he muttered, "yet for every shroud warrior that fell, 2 more replaced them." Then the betrayal came. A courier at Matthew's side suddenly turned blade flashing toward Elias's back. Too late. Nico twisted mid-strike, intercepted the blade bare-handed, and drove his sword through the traitor's chest. Blood sprayed. The man collapsed, eyes wide with shock. "A spy," Nico said grimly. "He's had eyes everywhere." Matthew sighed. "I warned you about wolves." The shroud commander stepped forward at last, unsheathing a blade black as night. "Enough," he said. "This ends now." He moved faster than the others, too fast. The clash between him and Nico sent shockwaves through the clearing. Their blades met again and again, sparks flying as ancient techniques collided. Each strike carried years of experience, of death, of war. "You abandoned your purpose," the commander snarled. "My purpose was never yours," Nico replied. The commander struck low. Nico parried, countered, and stepped inside his guard. The masked man staggered but recovered instantly, driving his elbow into Nico's ribs. Pain flared. Nico retreated a step, breath steady. Around them, the escort was breaking. Elias shouted orders, rallying what remained of his force. "Fall back! Protect the prisoner!" But Matthew was already smiling wider. Because the shroud wasn't trying to kill him. They were trying to free him. Smoke bombs burst, swallowing the clearing in choking darkness. Confusion spread instantly. Shouts echoed, shapes blurred, chains clattered. Nico spun just in time to see Matthew wrench his wrists, free locks already picked long ago. "So predictable," Matthew said softly. "You never were good at cages." He vanished into the smoke. "No!" Elias roared. Nico lunged forward, but the shroud commander blocked his path. "This is your failure," the masked man said. Again, Nico's eyes burned. "No," he whispered. "This is my correction." He struck. Their blades locked one final time. Nico twisted, disarmed the commander, and drove his sword through the obsidian mask. The figure fell, the smoke thinned. The forest was silent once more. Bodies littered the ground, couriers and shroud alike. Survivors stood dazed, wounded, shaken. Matthew Cole was gone. Elias approached Nico slowly, bloodied but alive. "We failed," he said. Nico stared into the trees where Matthew had disappeared. "No," he replied. "We're being led." The Blade Lord sheathed his sword. "I intended to finish what I started." Smoke drifted through the forest long after the clash had ended. The dead lay scattered like broken promises, armor dented, blood cooling. The silence afterward was heavier than the battle itself. Commander Elias stood among the fallen, his sword lowered, eyes hollow. Around him, what remained of the escort gathered wounded, shaken, fewer than half of what they once were. Matthew Cole was gone. The truth of it pressed against them like a wound that refused to close. Nico stood apart, staring into the trees where the traitor had vanished. His breathing was steady, but inside him something had fractured. This was not supposed to happen. Not again, Elias approached slowly. You knew he'd escape. Nico didn't turn. I knew he'd try. Then why didn't you stop him? Nico closed his eyes. Because he wasn't running, he said. He was being led. Elias frowned. By who? Nico finally faced him. By the Shroud's true master. A heavy silence followed. The one even they fear, Nico continued. The one who trained Matthew, and me. The words hung like poison in the air. You mean Elias began? Yes, Nico said quietly. The architect. A name spoken only in whispers. A myth to most. A nightmare to those who had survived the old wars. The man who had once united assassins, generals, spies, and kings under a single vision control through chaos. And Nico had been his finest creation. The aftermath. They buried the fallen before dawn. No prayers, no speeches, only silence and duty. When the sun rose, the forest looked deceptively peaceful, as though it hadn't just swallowed lives whole. Elias gathered the survivors. We continue, he said. The capital is 2 days away. Matthew will go there next. He always does. That's where the power is. Or the illusion of it, Nico murmured. Elias studied him. You're staying. Nico nodded. I started this war. I'll finish it. As they prepared to move, one of the younger couriers, barely more than a boy, approached Nico hesitantly. Sir Blade Lord, is it true? He asked. They say you killed 1,000 men alone. Nico met his gaze. No, he said softly. I killed pieces of myself 1,000 times. The boy swallowed and stepped away. The road to Virilith, the journey to the capital, was a scar across the land-burned villages, abandoned farms, roads lined with warnings carved into stone. The Shroud had passed through recently. Each sign carried a message. We are ahead of you. Night fell again. They camped near the ruins of an old watchtower, long forgotten by the empire it once protected. Fires were kept low. Guards doubled. Nico sat alone, sharpening his blade. Footsteps approached. Elias sat beside him. You could have walked away, he said. After tonight, no one would have blamed you. Nico didn't look up. Walking away is what allowed this to happen. Silence stretched between them. Why did you leave? Elias asked quietly. Nico paused, then spoke in a voice stripped of armor. Because the architect didn't just train warriors, he broke them, reforged them, made us believe purpose was worth any cost. I believed him until I realized I'd become the monster. He warned the world about Elias absorbed, that in Matthew. He believed longer than I did. A distant horn sounded, low, slow, deliberate. Every head turned. That's not Shroud, Elias said. No, Nico agreed. That's something worse. The city of Mask. By dawn, the capital of Virilith loomed on the horizon, towering spires of marble and iron, banners snapping in the wind, a city built on law, order, and secrets. But the gates stood open, too open, no guards, no crowds, just silence. Elias raised a hand. This is wrong. They entered cautiously. The streets were empty, shop abandoned, doors ajar. Then they saw them. Bodies lined neatly along the main avenue, not slaughtered, executed, each bearing the same symbol carved into their chest. A broken crown. Nico felt his chest tighten. This is his message, he said. The architect is declaring war. Suddenly, a slow clap echoed from the steps of the High Council Hall. Matthew Cole emerged from the shadows, unharmed, immaculate. "Well done," he said pleasantly. "You made it." Elias raised his sword. "Where is he?" Matthew smiled. "Everywhere." The doors behind him opened. Inside stood robed figures, nobles, generals, counselors alive. And behind them, a throne of steel. Upon it sat a figure draped in white and gold. The architect. "My blade," the man said softly, his voice echoing like memory itself. "You came home." Nico stepped forward. "No," he said. "I came to end you." The architect smiled. "Then let the world burn so we may be reborn." The throne of ash. The great hall of Virlith was silent except for the echo of footsteps. Nico walked forward alone. Behind him, Commander Elias and the remaining couriers formed a defensive line, weapons drawn, eyes darting between the towering pillars and the figures cloaked in gold and crimson. At the far end of the hall, the architect sat unmoving upon his throne of forged steel crafted from melted weapons of fallen kings. His presence was neither loud nor imposing, yet it weighed upon the room like gravity itself. Matthew Cole stood at his side, hands folded behind his back, wearing the expression of a man who had finally come home. "You've grown," the architect said softly. "But you still walk with the hesitation of a man who doubts his own shadow." Nico stopped several paces away. "You taught me doubt was weakness. And yet it saved you," the architect replied. "Look around, my blade. This world is rotting. Kingdoms rot, morality rots, order rots. I am merely the surgeon willing to cut." Elias spat on the marble floor. "You butchered cities." The architect's gaze slid to him. "And history will call it necessary." Matthew stepped forward. "You see now, Nico? You always did what you were told. I chose to understand why." Nico's fists clenched. "You chose chaos." "I chose truth," Matthew countered. "The world obeys fear far better than it does hope." The architect rose slowly. "My design is nearly complete. The shroud has infiltrated every major seat of power. By dawn, every kingdom will kneel or burn." Nico's voice hardened. "Not while I breathe." The architect smiled sadly. "Then you will die." With a subtle gesture, the doors slammed shut. The counselors stepped back, revealing hidden blades. The shroud revealed themselves not an army, but executioners. The room erupted. Steel sang. Elias charged, clashing with two masked elites. His blade struck true, but for every enemy that fell, another replaced them. Nico moved like a storm, unleashed. Every strike was memory and muscle, combined training forged in cruelty, now turned against its creator. He carved a path toward the throne. But Matthew intercepted him. Their blades met with a shriek. "You should have stayed gone," Matthew snarled. "You should have stayed human," Nico replied. They fought with mirrored precision, former brothers dancing in lethal symmetry. Each knew the other's rhythm, each anticipating feints that once belonged to shared training. "You were always better," Matthew growled. "That's why he loved you more." Nico hesitated just a fraction. Matthew struck. The blade pierced Nico's side. Pain exploded. Elias shouted in horror, but Nico stayed upright, teeth clenched. "You never wanted justice," Nico said through bloodied breath. "You wanted approval." Matthew's expression cracked. That moment was all Nico needed. He twisted, disarmed Matthew, and slammed him to the ground. Behind them, the architect raised his hand. Enough. Time itself seemed to slow. The air vibrated. Power, not magic, but will pressed down on everyone present. "Look at you," the architect said softly, "still clinging to ideals that failed you. You think killing me ends this?" He gestured around the hall. "This is already beyond you." The walls trembled. Outside, distant horns sounded hundreds. Elias stared in horror. Those aren't ours. The architect smiled. My armies arrive. Nico forced himself upright, blood soaking his armor. You trained me to see patterns, he said, and I see yours. The architect tilted his head. You don't control chaos, Nico continued. You're consumed by it. The architect's smile faltered. Nico stepped forward, blade trembling in his grip. I was your greatest weapon, he said. Now I am your reckoning. The architect lunged. Steel met steel. The clash shook the hall. Their duel was not about strength. It was about will. Every blow carried years of manipulation, regret, rage, and grief. Finally, Nico drove his blade through the architect's chest. The world went silent. The architect looked down at the wound, then smiled. Even now you still don't see. His body dissolved into ash. The throne cracked. The walls began to collapse. Elias shouted, "This place is coming down." Matthew laughed weakly from the floor. You've doomed us all. Nico turned to him. No, he said, I've freed us. He grabbed Matthew and hauled him up. Run. Here's a deep, emotionally gripping hook description for your story, followed by powerful hashtags you can use for posting or promotion.